Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. It's Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And one that maybe you've heard before or heard several times. And I read it because this week in the devotional, of my family devotional, Chris McCurley talks to us about helping children to be an influence rather than being influenced. Chris McCurley is also the host of the Dear Church podcast. So if you're a podcast listener and looking for a good podcast content from somebody in our brotherhood, Chris McCurley is a good one to look at. I'm sure he wouldn't mind the plug for his podcast, but read what he has to write. He has a lot of good stuff. I'm gonna kind of go in a little bit different direction. But how do we help our kids to be an influence rather than being influenced by this world? And I think all that kind of boils down to how teaching our kids and learning for ourselves how we're supposed to relate to the world around us. And so maybe you're listening to this and you don't have kids, or you have kids and they're all grown up, or wherever else you're at. The question still remains important. How are we supposed to engage and interact with the world around us? Richard Niebuhr came up with a book a long time ago. It's like in the 50s, I think. So way back. It's called Christ and Culture, and it's all trying to answer that question. Like, how have Christians in the past tried to do this? How are we supposed to do this now? Like, what is the church's relationship with culture supposed to be? And he comes out with 6 different categories. Said there's Christ or the church against culture, so our whole lives are supposed to be fighting against the culture around us. There's another view called the Christ of culture, and so there's this agreement between Christ and the culture, or the church and the culture around us, or a Christ above culture view, where Christ is above, ruling everything else under the culture, or maybe it's kind of like a synthetic type of both Christ and culture, where it tries to marry the two together, or a dualistic view, Christ and culture in paradox, to where Christ's church is over here, culture is over here, and we as Christians live battling between the two our whole lives, or the transformation view, the Christ transforms culture. So he goes through each of those 6 and points out different flaws about each one, points out positives of each one, and then he gets to the book and he's like, really, it's not any one of these in particular all the time, but also they're all kind of right. Like, they all make sense. You want to take pieces from each one of them and say, yeah, parts of that are right and parts of that are kind of right too. Maybe you want to stick to the last one where, like, yeah, Christ is here to transform culture, but there's some parts where maybe that isn't perfect either, because for different reasons. You have to read the book to get into it, but how it helps bring to light and help answer that question, like, how are we supposed to engage the world around us? And I think Romans talks about that a little bit. I don't think that's all of what Romans 12, 1 and 2 is about. But for the most part, saying, look, this is what your life is supposed to be about. To constantly offer your life as a living sacrifice to God. First and foremost, like, if you are living in a way that is sacrificing daily your body to God, then you are going to be in the right no matter where you're at. This is true and proper worship. And then that is immediately put in opposition to being conformed to the pattern of this world. It says, all right, this is where you're supposed to be. Here's what you're not supposed to do. Don't be conformed or engulfed or changed, morphed into the pattern of this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Not by this world, but by God, by Christ in his sacrifice. And so, maybe you've heard that a lot too. So going back to the main issue, like how do we pass this on to our children? I think being able, and of course, I'm still trying to train my child how to walk. So a lot of other people will have a lot more experience and expertise with this than I do. So I kind of say this on the outside looking in, not really having experienced it quite on my own. But maybe as they grow up, or as we're with them, especially when they're in the house with us, because there's going to come a day when they're not in the house with us any longer, and we have less face time with them. Spending time pointing out some of the stuff in our culture that is different. Not necessarily that we're in the category where we're always battling against culture all the time. There's a time and a place for that, but maybe there's a time and a place where we can lean into what our culture is doing. And this is a whole different argument, but especially getting them to analyze culture on their own and look at what our culture is doing, what our culture is saying, pointing that stuff out, because a lot of it just goes, it goes in our brain unexamined and just becomes part of our background knowledge, and we don't really give 2 seconds of thought about it. But especially for teens who are head into media 24/7 throughout the day, like they're constantly getting input from different viewpoints through technology. Getting them to stop and analyze some of that stuff and say, hey, think about some of the stuff that you're seeing, some of the stuff that you're reading, and not only on a surface level, but what are the implications of that? Like if you read this is happening, like what are the implications of that as a nation, but maybe also like as a Christian? Like what are, if we accept this or we do this, like where is that going to lead to? Just pointing some of this stuff out that we see in culture and getting them to think critically about it as it comes up, instead of letting it just pass over, or instead of just writing it off completely and just saying, oh, we're not like that, forget that. Getting them to really analyze and develop an opinion, develop a defense even of what they believe, what you want them to believe, and getting them to analyze culture on their own. And hopefully they'll start to do that on their own. This is a big question. This was a big topic. Hopefully that was maybe somewhat helpful. But in all that we do, may we seek to be not conformed to the pattern of this world, but transformed by the renewing of our mind as we offer our bodies daily to Christ. If there's anything you need, hopefully we'll be here. Just let us know. Call the church office. We'll be glad to help. Thank you. Bye.